Greetings, you happily miserable accursed. It's Herle here with Leichnitz, Teneycke, and Reid. They're not only the best, but best-looking political panel in Canadian media, pod or mainstream.
That can't be true.
And I've got to personally thank Karen Moores 3611 from our YouTube channel, who was kind enough to shout out my hairdo. First comment in the stream. More precisely, she wrote, "David, you have the best hair on the show." I've clicked on it 77 times now. Now listen, I think that is particularly unfair to Jordan, who clearly has the best hair on the show. I'm not surprised I beat Reid and that piece that he wears in homage of David Letterman on the top of his head. Kory was a bit of a surprise, because Kory's got hair, and I think it must have been that one time, Kory, when that strand was out of place there. That must have been how you lost out to me on the best hair on the panel.
Your fans demand perfection, Kory.
That was a dark day.
More gel.
You think it's a funny little joke that you tell every single fucking episode, Herle, but I have people who stop me on the street now and pull on my hair like the Green Goblin's mask, expecting it to come off, and it's my real hair. I chose to have it look this way.
Not that piece right here.
Right? All of it is real. It's, so grim. Fuck.
Okay. All right. Here's the rundown today. We'll give our impressions of the Carney swearing in and do a bit of a breakdown of his first moves as Prime Minister. What story is he trying to sell Canadians? Our cursed clipping is an opinion piece in the Star from Andrew Tumilty. Pierre Poilievre is still searching for the right role to play in the changed election narrative. We'll talk about that. And then we'll dive into Carney's Brookfield and Blind Trust issues management approach. Good, bad, somewhere in between. And finally, the eternal Mr. Pinent and our Hey Yous. But I've got to start off, Scott, by noting that yesterday was the 50th anniversary of the Bionic Woman. So how did you celebrate or commemorate this event?
By running in slow motion with the man I love. And honest to God, a year and a half ago, we may have talked about this on the pod before, not only the best looking pod, but the only pod where you get multiple mentions of the Bionic Woman. But my youngest son and I watched the entire episode, all 3 seasons, which you can actually download. $6 Million Man, you cannot download. However, I've got all the DVDs, so we've worked our way through that series as well. But, I mean, did you know that Lee Majors... I think
Lindsay Wagner could have taken Lee Majors.
Oh, man, no, I don't get... There's a whole fanfic dirty shit going down that road there that I've not only consumed, but participated in enthusiastically. But Lee Majors... Actually, for the 2-part Bionic Woman show that was originally on the $6 Million Man, which introduced tennis star and former Steve Austin love Jamie Summers, he actually recorded a song called Jamie, which plays multiple times in both episodes. Then there's another 2-parter where they bring her back, the return of the Bionic Woman, because they kill her off originally. And then the studio executives are like, hey, she's popular. This is a big deal. So there's a song and it's like, Jamie, we thought we were friends, but it's so good to see you. And it's going to be more than just friendship. It's fantastic. He's trying to do Mac Davis, but he doesn't have the wit or the voice. It's so good. So I'm glad you mentioned it. This listen,
sounds very 70s country.
Fantastic. It was more 70s schmaltz, more like Engelbert Humperdinck, A Man in Love sort of territory.
Well, you're giving me ideas for the next campaign theme song here, Scott.
Yeah, let's not feed that particular beast, Scott.
But
it's so good. It's so good. The one where Jamie participates in a beauty pageant undercover is perhaps the most misogynistic, fabulously entertaining hour of television you could ever lay your eyes on.
So let's construct a bionic woman to fight crime and appear in beauty contests. Right.
Am I lost? I feel lost. Have I wandered into the wrong Zoom call?
Yeah, you're in the wrong podcast.
Spoiler alert, the Burt Park stand-in Slimeball MC is the bad guy.
I'm at the comic book store instead of in the political podcast room. So.
Okay, let's go to the political podcast.
All right.
So since we last met, Mark Carney has been sworn in with a redesigned cabinet, met with Premiers Ford and Legault, done some retail campaigning, theatrically killed the carbon tax, and jetted off to Europe to meet with Macron, Starmer, and Charles. Kory, how do you think he's doing?
Well, I think those are the sensible things that I would do if I were him. Like what I would avoid doing at all costs is going down and meeting with Trump right now, because I think that would be a Zelensky-like interaction, in my view. So I think you want to go and collect allies and put the team together that's going to fight the Trump menace south of the border. And allies are few and far between right now. Like I think the Canadian premiers are there. I think that should be self-evident. We're all in the same ship that's on fire at the moment. But allies foreign are few and far between. I will, for one, be interested to see whether he has any success. I think as close as we got with the royal family was like Charles putting on a Canadian naval uniform when he visited a ship, which they pushed out. I'm like, the subtlety of that is insanely subtle. I don't know what's the most subtle thing that you.
What?
I feel like that probably counts as super clear communication from Buckingham Palace.
Standing again, next to a forest, it's just insanely subtle. But look, this should be.
Sorry, what is the virtue of Charles? In all honesty, okay, we respected the Queen, but what is the virtue of Charles? And what's the virtue of I wore the royal Canadian Garter, which in Latin is embroidered with what was originally the insignia for the Hudson's Bay Company in 1874. And therefore, Trump should know we are not fucking around here in England. It's just just come out and say something or don't say something. But don't give me a heraldry expert to tell me what the message was. Just so
my only thought on that, Scott, is that he's actually a genetic Manchurian candidate that is there to actually promote republicanism throughout the Commonwealth.
Consider me converted.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the bigger test will be, can this guy who holds a couple of European passports actually go and deliver? Can he actually bring some allies on side? And I don't know what the answer to that's going to be. I clearly has relationships there, but if relationships would get it done, I think we would have had more people out there already. So I don't know. We'll see. I think it's worth taking a chance on. I assume if they're going over there, they have some indication that he's not going to come back completely empty-handed. But it's not obvious to me where I sit that he will be successful. But let's see.
You blew past the cabinet picks, Kory. Is that because you just think they're irrelevant?
Well, look, there's not, I guess there's some change, but not a ton of change. I would be remiss, and for all those who listen to the podcast, Guilbeault being out of environment is something I think is noteworthy, because I think he's been such an impediment to doing any of the things that we're going to have to do, whether it's, Ring of Fire, which I would, I'm a little closer to of Ontario politics. But to say that he was uninterested in proceeding with that, I think would be an understatement. I think there's no interest really. And when it comes to oil and gas and energy, he's a lifelong sworn enemy of those industries. And if we want to actually maintain any level of prosperity in this country, building pipelines and resource projects around critical minerals is a huge foundational piece of what we're going to have to do better at. So we gotta remove some of those people. I was perplexed by Wilkinson staying where he is because he's not really gotten a lot done in that area either. So I don't know. If you want to have a positive view of Freeland, then transportation. We're going to need more port and rail infrastructure and other things. Maybe that's like putting somebody in a critical area that he has some faith in, or maybe it's just diminishing her because she got 8% I don't know. Guess we'll see.
Well, the fact that she's following Anita Anand into transport really tells me this is the place that talented women are deep sexed. So
it's the one-way train to oblivion. Is that what you're saying? I don't know, but not a ton of change. Gould not being in, I think, is I don't know what she said in the hallway of the debates that pissed him off. I don't know. It's unusual that you don't put in other leadership candidates who are in the House, but also she's like a little too progressive for my taste, so I'm not terribly upset about it.
A bit of flag waving here, because this seems like an appropriate time for it. That, friends, qualifies as an understatement, for all the obvious reasons. Not waving the flag for me, although I'm a certified proud Canadian. For our presenting sponsor, TELUS Health, a company conceived, owned, and operated in this country and embedded with Canadian values. Their MyCare platform, available in Alberta, BC, and Ontario, is transformative. Primary, publicly funded healthcare in the palm of your hand or on your laptop. And it's a note-perfect expression of those Canadian values. I spoke last week about the how of MyCare. This week, the why. Born of this country's spirit of innovation, it honors, that's honors with a U, by the way, our long-standing commitment to universal access. Quality care made more convenient and more accessible because it leverages advanced digital technology and a user-friendly interface purpose-designed for Canadians. I've said it here before. We're a vast nation built on the strong backs of our rural and remote communities. MyCare vastly improves public health care access no matter how far you live from urban centers. It's spelled CENTRES, by the way, and it's growing. It features multilingual capabilities because we're a multicultural society. It provides physical and mental health services 365 days a year for the 1 in 5 Canadians who don't have access to a family doctor. And further to helping our governments reach their health goals while reducing burden to the system, TELUS Health's other virtual care products also make a huge contribution to employer-funded virtual care through workplace benefit plans in businesses all over the country. Ready access to physicians, nurse practitioners, and other health professionals, physiotherapists, clinical psychologists, dietitians, etc., with just a few clicks. TELUS Health and MyCare, Canadian innovation, sprung from Canadian values, transforming Canadian universal healthcare delivery. From A to, you guessed it, Z. All right, Jordan, what kind of start do you think Prime Minister Carney is off to?
Well, I mean, God, probably like the fastest one in Canadian history. Can you imagine everything that is coming at him and the speed at which it's happening and having to staff up while that's all going on? It's really, I think, bears noting how remarkable all of that is. And I think given that he's had a pretty good first few days. I thought he was off to a rocky start with the Mendocino chief of staff appointment. I think it was a pretty crappy use of political capital in the first day or so, but the swearing in was totally forgettable. And I think that was a big part of how it was designed. It wasn't just about who was there. It was obviously also about how it was done. It was such a huge contrast to what we saw with Trudeau. And I think, in a lot of ways, reflecting on some of the conversations that we were having in December, this is really the type of shuffle that Trudeau should have been looking to do in December, a leaner cabinet, focused really on economic issues, focused on fighting this trade war with the United States. So I think that template served really well for Carney this time around. It definitely communicated the two things he needed to communicate, which was clear change in style from Trudeau, clear change in substance from Trudeau, and a focus on the economic factors around the trade war. So that was the good stuff. I think, look, there's interesting tea leaves to read in terms of who was shuffled where, about where they sit within the pecking order of a Carney-led Liberal Party. But these ministers are not actually going to get to do anything. They are ministers for a week. So I don't, and I think that for some, that's probably just as well. I thought that Champagne was actually quite weak in terms of answering questions about the government's fiscal plans and about what they were talking about in terms of spending reductions. So it's likely just as well for them that they're moving immediately into a campaign footing. I did think that leaving Gould out is a mistake. It looks petty. And when you couple that with getting rid of the gender balance, getting rid of any ministry that has to do specifically with gender and women, it looks a bit like a poke in the eye at young women. And I don't think it was necessary. She's got a lot of talent. I think that they could have found space for her, but she was the only one really during the leadership race who had some sharp elbows at Carney, and I think she's paying a price for that. So I think a bit overall generally fine for him. I thought it was smart this week for him to go to Europe. I disagree a bit with Kory here. I do think that he is going to find some success in terms of European allies saying supportive things. We had the G7 meeting last week, and you saw the German foreign minister was already out, with some statements about solidarity with Canada. So the Europeans are looking for ways to chime in on the right side of this. But the real point about going to Europe is that this is shit that Pierre Poilievre can't do and that no one can really imagine him doing either. And that's the strength of it, that they are using this 1 week in government, this 1 week of holding that prime minister position to go and contrast those two leadership styles.
Jordan, if I could just stick with you for a second. The trip he's on is France, England, and Iqaluit.
Yeah.
What's the symbol there?
So I think so France is obviously your way to touch on Europe, to go talk about CETA, to talk about expanding trade relationships with Europe. The UK, this is, of course, with the Commonwealth, an important historic relationship for Canada. Also a place where Carney has very specific ties because of his role at the Bank of England. So I think going there and being seen to have those connections and have some resonance there will probably be strong for him as compared to maybe going to some other places in Europe. And then Iqaluit, this is like where you can talk very seriously about defense issues. I think that there's also, it was interesting. I noticed that, so we had, Poilievre was up in Iqaluit a few weeks ago and got blasted by the premier for not consulting about his announcement before he was up there. And then Singh was up there a couple weeks ago and did an announcement with local folks there. And now you've got Carney coming up. So I think that there's also a bit of an implied contrast there that they're drawing around some of those Northern Arctic sovereignty and defense issues. And I don't think that that's a bad thing. Those are all things that they need to be touching on thematically if they want to keep a tight messaging focus on what is this new world order with the U.S., as a hostile party, really, in North America. Where do we sit in that, and who do you trust to lead that? And that is what they are really hoping to drive to seal as the ballot question for the campaign.
All right, Scott. Head and Shoulders shampoo and Jean Lapierre used to say you never get a second chance to make a first impression. How did Prime Minister Carney do?
I thought it was a triumph. And to the point where I'm anxious about how pleased I was with what I saw and how strategic I thought it all was. And I will grant people who want to make the point that 87% of the ministers were also Trudeau-era ministers and all those kinds of things. But I just think that it really rang some of the important bells that need ringing if there's to be any hope of completing this improbable resurrection of the party and its improbable reelection. And first, I thought that it was in tone and in a lot of substance really laser focused on what it needed to be, which is focused. It was so in contrast. It demonstrated and signaled such change from Trudeau in particular. You couldn't help. And that was symbolized in things that might be cosmetic, like reducing the cabinet by a third and shifting some people around and so on and so forth. But it was also really, really anchored by the dramatic contrast in the personal styles of the leader. And people and the conservatives are going to waste a lot of energy saying he's just like Justin, he's just like Justin. And I really think that is, they've got to beat this guy. I don't think they're going to beat this guy just by slapping Justin Trudeau on him. Watching that news conference, and I know lots of voters didn't, my mom didn't, and so on and so forth. But the contrast and comparison between the two couldn't have been more extraordinary. There was no highfalutin, soaring, inflated rhetoric. It was, we're here for a reason. We have a mission in front of us, and we can't afford to get it wrong. So let's get to fucking work. That's what everything about that day signaled. Its almost entire focus from a substance standpoint was economic. He said he had two priorities. One was to deal with Trump and tariffs for our economic security, and second, to put more money back in the pockets of people. I mean, how much more on point can you be in terms of where Canadians' anxieties and desires and priorities are right now? Now, it doesn't mean that they're going to believe that he's the right guy to do it. Doesn't mean that they're going to believe that the Liberal Party can be counted on to do it. But it's a whole lot better than having an appendix of priorities that cover everything from soup to nuts, which is what you very often get on days like this. And then it also contrasted, obviously, in very important ways with Poilievre and Trump. Trump's always hovering there. His manner couldn't be more different, but also completely different from Poilievre in terms of the partisan content, the edge, the tone. And we talked about this before. Even when Poilievre says things that are directed at Trump, he evokes Trump in his manner and his tone. You didn't get that for a second. I like moving on the consumer carbon tax. Again, I think if the conservatives want to spend 3 days saying it's a lie, it's sneaky, yes, they're reducing it to zero, but it's not really eliminated, fill your boots. Like three things are going to happen. One, you're not going to pay it. And you're certainly not going to pay the increase as of April 1st. Two, you're going to see gas prices fall. This is going to be at the beginning of an election campaign. And three, you're going to get another rebate check sometime in the middle of the election campaign. I feel like our friend Kory could have written that script for Doug Ford. Like those are political benefits that are now embedded in that move. And I liked the visual of it. I thought it was ballsy to take a page out to demonstrate that they were not scared of a visual that they thought works for Trump and to adopt it and make it their own with the big signature. I quite liked the stagecraft of all that. I like going to Europe. I don't agree with Kory. I think we have a lot of allies. I think everybody has allies as long as you're not the United States, China, and Russia right now. We're all in the same fucking boat. We're all been cast into the water by those guys, and particularly Trump. So I think he's going to demonstrate all the stuff that
I think we have allies. I wouldn't ask him for too much right now, but
that's right. That may be, but I think we'll be able to make the point about economic security with trade in Europe and with the UK, and we'll be able to make the point about physical security and defense spending both in Europe and then again reinforced when he comes to Nunavut, all of which signals dramatic change from Trudeau, and I think positions him reasonably well in terms of where the temperature of the debate is that's going into this campaign. So, like, I'm uncomfortable with how much I liked what I've seen so far. I'm worried that the bottoms of my hopes will fall out because I literally am. Like, I'm like, fuck, man, don't do it, Reid. This isn't grade 7. This isn't grade 7 at the teen dance when Just Between You and Me came on and you fell in love. Don't fall in love again, buddy. Your heart will just be broken.
He's only made eye contact with you, Scott. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. Well, look, I hope you're right about Europe, Scott. I hope you're right. My read on what's happening there more is they're watching Canada. I think they're watching Canada more than they're supporting Canada. I think we are like the reconnaissance unit that's going to go and either, find the weakness in the defenses or get utterly shot up and left for dead on the battlefield. And I think they're watching to see how it goes. No other country has responded with as much vigor and as much pushback as Canada with respect to Trump tariffs and some of the things that he's doing. Like, I think that's just, unequivocally true. But we stand out as a result of that, and I think people are looking to see whether that is a path that is worth taking. I also think it's something that Canada is in a better position to do than others because culturally and by proximity and by personal relationships, much closer to the United States, like in every way, not just that we share such a extensive border, but France doesn't have, dozens of, A-list movie stars that are French. Canada does. We, a bunch of Germans don't winter in Florida. Like the connections between Canada and the US are just so much more robust. But we're the ones who are really, I think, doing the lion's share of pushing back right now and campaigning in US media to try to shift US public opinion. Others can't do that as easily. Maybe the UK has a better shot than some of the others, but we'll see. But I think we are the recce unit here.
Kory, can I drag you down from such a highfalutin territory into something more prosaic that interests me?
Sure.
Carney's performance. I think we now see it for what it is. Like his demeanor, his style is not going to change a lot over time. He may get marginally better at giving a rally speech, but fundamentally his message delivery, his demeanor is what it is. How do you think it works?
I think for the campaign that they're facing, that's upon us, it's probably a good contrast for the reasons that Scott talked about. Like and we've talked about before, I don't think it's a good time to be talking about your big, beautiful, bring it home tax cut and mirroring Trump language. Like I just think that's it's both a tactical and a strategic miss. Like I think you want to draw contrast with Trump a little bit more stylistically, and I think he does that. I think being good at giving a barn burner rally speech is overestimated in politics. I'm a big fan of Mike Harris. I can tell you, I don't think I ever saw him deliver a barn burner. And you can look at many other politicians where like that is not who've been very successful. I would say
who was shitty at it? Pierre Trudeau.
Yeah, Pierre
Trudeau was a shitty speaker, right?
Well, look, people were cheering Chrétien's speech at the convention, which maybe stood out in contrast to the other shitty speeches. But I don't think anyone is going to mistake Chrétien as a master orator. He has a style that is very unique and that is his own. And so it has an authenticity that I think is very, communicates very well. But no one is going to be buying a book of famous Jean Chrétien quotes that are anything other than, knee slappers, right? Like it's not, this is not Ronald Reagan. This isn't, soaring rhetoric. It's not JFK. Like it's just not what they do. But that didn't diminish the fact that they were, in their own rights, very effective political communicators. So, I think it's a good style for the fight that they're going into, and it's more businesslike. It's short. It's matter of fact. It's a little more managerial, perhaps. Like I think that's a good look if you're replacing a guy who I don't think you would, Canadians would select to manage. Since it's St. Patrick's Day, I'll say a piss up at a bar.
Hey, Jordan, have you ever seen anything that embodies the notion that timing is everything in politics, like Carney? Because he looks to me like the guy that the Conservatives were salivating running against, except for the moment has made all of the things that they were looking forward to running against him on strengths for him.
Sorry, my internet completely died. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. I was going to say that, have you ever seen anything that embodies the timing is everything in politics aphorism like Carney? in the sense that he looks like, how's your internet now, Jordan? You know what, Scott? Maybe I'll ask you, Jordan, are you with us or not? I mean, you have to decide right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's just, I don't know what's going on out there. He's the man for this moment in a lot of ways, I think, because his style is exactly the opposite of Trump. Like, if you were to put them on a spectrum, you have here somebody who is an anti-populist. He is an expert. He is an elite. He is somebody who travels in those global circles that folks on the right have been crapping on.
And up until Trump emerged, Jordan, the Conservatives thought they could beat that candidate to death, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, and maybe this is the danger of the overreach on that side of the spectrum, right? Because in Trump, it's found its most, one of its more perfect representations, and people are finding out that they act like it when the rubber hits the road. And so that stylistic contrast, I think, is hugely helpful for him. Look, in a normal campaign, I don't think he would be a good candidate. He's incredibly boring. He's very, I found his scrums, he's very chippy with reporters when they dig on any issues that pertain, for example, to financial transparency for him. There's just a lot of crosstalk. He's seems not to naturally have any ability to tell relational stories about politics, but none of that really matters right now. All those rules, I think, are out the window because voters are increasingly telling us that what they're looking for is an answer to the question of who's going to protect them against Trump. And they're looking for certainty, and they're looking for a contrast to Trump. And so in that moment, I think that it really shines in a way that it could not ordinarily.
So it is a matter of fact that working in isolation not only endangers mental health, but is also far more likely to drive you to self-harm than some of the other, more collegial ways people make a living. Scientists have evaluated this. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention conducted the largest ever study of the subject a few years ago. It concluded that farmers, lumberjacks, and fishermen are most prone to taking their own lives at an alarming rate of 85 per 100,000 people. That is 10 times more than those at the lowest end of the scale, people who work in proximity to others. The Canadian farming industry, as you can probably imagine, is deeply concerned about this. So is our sponsor, CN, which has a long history of working with Canadian farmers from coast to coast. In any case, the focus of Canadian Agricultural Safety Week, which begins March 16th, is mental health. The message to farmers is, take care of yourselves. Don't let yourself become isolated. Reach out to friends. Deal honestly with negative thoughts. And remember, there is never any shame in asking for help. Please, ask for help if you need it. Look, let's face it, these are stressful times, times of negative thoughts for all of us. But as the old wisdom teaches, this too shall pass. CN regards Canadian farmers as vital, cherished allies. It is committed to helping them get their crops to market smoothly, efficiently, and safely. That's the way it is during boom times, and that's the way it is right now. Count on it. Elbows up, together. Scott, I don't want to put Kory on the spot by asking him this question, so I'll ask it to you.
Okay.
Which is, as gleeful as you are, the fucking Conservatives are outraged. The anger coming from Conservatives about what's happened is fucking white hot.
No question about it. And I mean, all of this is said, exactly nothing has been won. Exactly no hills have been climbed. Exactly no armies have been conquered. So, it's an important qualification. And there are lots of historical precedents for some elements of this, where this rise then begets a fall. So we'll have to see how it plays out. But just the journey to this point has enraged Conservatives because they can't believe it's happening, and they can't believe the way in which it's happening. And I don't want to speak for Conservatives, obviously. They would probably not want me to speak for them, but I can't. I think they're sitting around going, I can't believe that fate gave us this Arthur Mahan motherfucker and he's taken the fight to us. How the hell did this happen? This is the guy we wanted. We wanted this flat, uncharismatic cat. And then all of a sudden, they realized that in a world where people wanted a break from Trudeau's soaring overstatements and theatricality and Trump's manic anger and mega hostility, flat is just what Canada is looking for. Flat, man. Flat. And managerial and focused in sentences that are short and say something as opposed to long and to communicate nothing. So I just think they justifiably are looking at this and saying, I can't believe this is happening to us. And there's also, I think, a notion of we had this one. Right. We had this, we had everything that we wanted in place and they're entirely able to fight for it. So, I mean, we know Jenny, right? But I think that there is also an element of resentment about the fact, like, I can't believe we have to fight for this thing now. Come on. Right. And why don't people see what we see? This is still the Liberal Party. All right. Mark Carney is a technocrat. Don't give us this, and all of that. But I'll just one small thing I'll circle that I think is interesting. And Kory mentioned this phrase earlier. One of the things that is so interesting about the Conservatives and how they're adjusting and how they're not adjusting, bring it home. I think bring it home is about as I never got the slogan for personally. I always thought that it had been cooked up in a focus group. It didn't really make real people sense to me, but I think they have got to abandon it. Right now, it couldn't sound more weird. It sounds completely like marketing bullshit. And it actually has a pejorative implication when we are facing a nativist move around the world and from the United States, when the imperative is for us to reach out to the rest of the world and preserve our trade relationships upon which our income, our industry, and our jobs rely. And this bring it home. It subtly communicates all kinds of weird things. It's like we don't bring it home. What do you mean bring it home? We need to be we need friends. We need around the world. We don't need to hunker down within ourselves. So I just think they've got a lot of thinking to do.
All right.
Well, it's maybe a little entitled too. It's maybe a little entitled, right? Like it's about your party winning, which is different than, what you're going to do for the public, right? Like it's not aiming towards something that's for voters. It's about aiming for something that's for people in the party. And I do think I get what it was when it was launched. It was, it's almost a call to people in the party not to be complacent about winning an election, and that, you got to, keep running till you cross the finish line. And like, I think when you're at 47% in the polls, I think that's not an entirely bad message to be delivering at the party rally. It's just now we're in a dogfight, and it's like, it's more like, scrap like tooth, for tooth and nail for every vote. It's a different position. So I don't think it's aged well, but I get where it came from when it was launched. I just think the situation has changed, and and I largely agree with we are going to be in a more internationally focused world here for a bit, where reaching out is going to be more important than Canada first, so to speak, just to jump on another one.
Well, we're deep into Poilievre now, so let's jump to our clipping of the day, which comes to us from Andrew Tumilty at the Toronto Star. It's a good one about Poilievre's dilemma. Here's an excerpt. If Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives lose the next federal election, it will not be because the Liberals changed leaders. It will be because the narrative of the election changed and Poilievre couldn't find the right role for himself in the new story. There are really only three roles in any narrative: the hero, the villain, and the victim. Poilievre and his team have spent years honing the narrative that Canada is broken and that he is the hero to fix it. They cast Justin Trudeau as their villain, and like a comic movie franchise, they rolled him out over and over again as Canadians' chief antagonist. That approach worked well enough to see the Conservatives regularly lead the Liberals by 15 to 20 points in most polls. Enter Trump, tariffs, and an enormous plot twist. The U.S. president's threats to annex Canada, not to mention his unjustified attacks on our economy, changed the narrative for the next election. The sheer scope of media coverage, as well as the potential for personal impact, meant this new narrative was being heard by more people who found it more relevant than the story of a broken nation Poilievre had been peddling. In grocery stores and hockey arenas, in TV ads for Canadian companies, and on the stage of Saturday Night Live, Canada and Canadians rallied to face this new challenge together. They demonstrated a clear understanding of who the villain was in this story. Unfortunately for Poilievre, it wasn't Trudeau. Poilievre needed Trudeau as his villain for his story of a broken Canada. And I left this line in for you, Scott. It's not that necessary, but I left it in for you. Without the Joker, Batman is just a rich guy with unresolved trauma and anger issues. He gets to be the hero only because the alternative, a psychopathic killer clown, is worse than the idea of a billionaire vigilante. So, Jordan,
I think that grossly undersells Batman, but okay.
Well,
We're back at the comic book store. I knew it.
Batman in real life is Jeffrey Epstein.
Oh God,
that's the worst thing I've ever heard anyone say.
And Poilievre put a fine spotlight on this today, because after 3 days of claiming that Carney had not killed the consumer carbon tax with his signature in the cabinet room, this morning Poilievre announced that he is against the industrial carbon tax, and that he will kill the industrial carbon tax. So this tells me that they're not giving up on that issue. They're not letting this thing go. They're trying to find new terrain. So this column and everything that most of what we say is predicated on the assumption that they need to change strategies to find a way into the slipstream of this new story in Canada.
Yep.
They seem, and it's not atypical for them to disagree with the conventional wisdom, they seem not to agree with that, and to be doubling down on wanting to have a carbon tax election. So is that a viable path, Jordan?
Well, it's a path. Whether it's viable or not, we'll only see. I mean, look, I think it's likely a mistake. And I agree with most of this clipping, and I would say maybe the formulation I always think about is that, which is similar, is that every campaign is there's only two types of elections, right? There's change elections or stability elections. And as long as the Conservatives are able to continue to keep public interest focused around the idea of a change election, then they have a chance. And in that sense, I think that the strongest argument that they make is not anything about the carbon tax. It's not anything about Carney's personal financial holdings, although these things are vulnerabilities that can maybe motivate some of their voters. But it's the idea that the Liberals shouldn't have a fourth term. That goes to the core of the argument, because that is the weakest place, I think, that they could be hitting at. And so I don't think that doubling down and constructing a new carbon tax argument that's really predicated on the scaffolding that was built around Trudeau necessarily solves their problem. The real question is, are we in a change election, or are we in an election where Canadians are looking for stability? And the problem for them is that really, Poilievre has used over the last 2 years, he's used Canadians' pain around affordability, around the struggles that they're facing, and he's really dwelled in that pain point. They spend a lot of time there, and to the detriment of providing sort of forward-looking or vaguely even positive types of fixes. And I'm not saying he doesn't have policy prescriptions, but I'm saying in terms of his orientation of his campaign, really primarily it was around dwelling in that point, and that is now a weakness, because Canadians are looking for who's going to take them forward, who's going to confront this struggle as we go forward. And what's more relevant right now? Is it that pain point around a prime minister who's gone, or is it Trump and the threat that people feel that they're facing that is somewhat existential to the country? And we're seeing shifts right now happening in public opinion that tell us that question is now moving to become central. And so I think it is a mistake for the Conservatives to double down on a campaign that worked for them 2 months ago. And I'm sure that it is deeply disorienting. I am sure that it is incredibly alarming to see a 20-point lead evaporate in 2 months. But you have to also roll with the campaign that's in front of you. And you may need to mourn and put away the campaign you thought you were going to run and run the one that is actually out in front of you. And that's hard to do if you're really deep in a bunker. And I think that we're going to see whether there is flexibility within that team, within Poilievre, whether he as a leader has the capacity to kind of rise to this new potential central ballot question of the election. Again, I don't want to overstate this. I still think it is, in a lot of ways, the Conservatives' elections to lose because they have that very strong grounding. They are still unmatched in terms of the firepower that they've been putting out in advertising until now. And that is like a deep bedrock to dwell on. And my guess is that the reason that they want to go back to those carbon tax messages is because they want to utilize all the money that they have put on the table over the last 2 years, building a base of voters who have that concern, and they want to continue to be able to activate them. And maybe that works for them, but I think it's a thinner and thinner path as the Trump issue continues to just surprise every day in the headlines with like whatever fresh hell comes out of the crazy orange man's mouth, and they're really at the mercy of that.
Kory, what do you think?
Look, I agree with a lot of what Jordan just said. I think there's some brand equity in these things, and it's painful to leave that on the table. But I think if you want an example of not reading the electorate and what the main topic the electorate wants to talk about by talking about other things where you have some brand equity or some historic appeal. Look at the recent Ontario election where
the Liberals and healthcare.
Yeah, you can talk about healthcare all the way to 29 points if you want. But if the electorate is decided that this is going to be an election about who is best to square off against Trump, there is a very clear villain in this comic book, and it's Donald Trump. And if you're fighting the Liberal Party instead of fighting Donald Trump, I think you're putting yourself at a real disadvantage. Now, I think we've seen some pretty good examples of Poilievre really bringing some strong language and messaging about Trump, and
they're not sticking with it though.
But they're moving back to these other issues. On the industrial carbon tax, look, on a policy basis, I think there's a very good argument for getting rid of it. Now, from a political campaign manager perspective, just because carbon tax is in the name doesn't mean it's the same as the other one.
Kory,
in terms of how viewers.
Kory, I've never seen a poll where upwards of 75% of Canadians did not think that big business should pay more to deal with climate change.
This is exactly my point. It's what everybody thinks should happen. When you're dealing with environmental stuff, the guy with the two big smokestacks is the problem with pollution, not the tailpipe on my car. Right. That is in essence, I think, where the polling on that is derived from. And so just because it has carbon tax in the name does not mean it tests the same with voters. Another complication with it, and maybe this is a little too policy wonkish, but what province I think had the first cap on large emitters in this area is the province of Alberta. Like, a lot of what you're campaigning against is actually, provincial environmental regulation more than it is federal. And, who knows where Daniel Smith would land on this, but, previous conservative premiers would probably make the argument that having only one of those in Alberta is not as good as having one everywhere else too. So, I think you're trading, for a topic that has a much lower base level a line of support, and you're losing a whole bunch of the allies that you had in the fight. On the getting rid of the consumer carbon tax, it's essentially every political party in Canada is in favor of getting rid of the consumer carbon tax. On the industrial side, it gets a lot muddier, and so I'm not going to disagree with the policy. In fact, I think, in this context where, we're going to have to square off and be competitive against the United States, we're going to have to get our expectations recalibrated on how much, environmental hand-wringing we can do about major projects. I think that's just what's going to happen. However, I'm not sure I'd want to fight the election on that issue. I think Poilievre was in a really good spot when he was taking the heat to Trump. Like, I think that is the path, in my view. And I think it's less about going after the Liberals and trying to make them be like Justin Trudeau than it is to demonstrate that you've got a better plan to position the economy and the country to respond to Trump by, being better managers, by, making better economic decisions, by making Canada more independent from the rest of the world in certain respects in terms of attracting jobs and investment and all of those things. I think those are all really, credible, messages for Poilievre to make publicly. But I think the other stuff is, looking in the rearview mirror a little too much, and it's trading some, A-list issues for B or C-list issues, and that reminds me of the Ontario campaign and for the opposition there, and it didn't work well, and I don't think it'll work well in this case.
Scott, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Yeah, exactly. And you can show up to a hockey match with a tennis racket, but I think you're going to have a hard time convincing everybody to play tennis. So that's what the Conservatives are doing. In some respects, they are making the bet that they can make this election be about the issue set that they want it to be and prefer it to be and have been preparing for it to be. And I think the great strength of the Conservative Party over the last number of years has, and there are things I don't like about it and challenges with it and so forth, but that it does, when it's been really good and sharp, it's because it does manage to channel the common sense of regular people. It knows what those folks are saying. It understands how those folks are talking, and it strikes a chord. But I'm telling you right now, you don't need to be a public policy expert. You don't need to be a trade expert. You talk to an electrician in Peterborough or a contractor in Red Deer, and they're telling you that they're fucking worried about what's going on with Trump. And it's an inescapable issue. And there's lots of evidence that we're seeing lots of real world impacts of this uncertainty. And you don't have to just look to your portfolio and your RSPs and whether or not your equities have been diluted. Like, people are starting, and large employers are starting to lay people off. Building projects are not proceeding. And so this is on people's minds. So, to Kory's point about, the Ontario campaign and how, the Ontario Liberals made the mistake of trying to campaign on healthcare, make it about healthcare. One of the things that makes this situation even more interesting, in my view, is that if you think the Conservatives are at risk of maybe making that same mistake, campaigning on cost of living and carbon tax when people won an election that's going to be about Trump, is that one of the reasons the Ontario Liberals had to make the choice they did was that they couldn't speak with any degree of credibility on the other issue. I don't know that that's true for the Conservatives. I don't know that they have to forfeit this ground. I don't know that they can't find, and we haven't seen examples and moments where they've been able to credibly interject into this debate.
Can I interject at that and say, I think it requires an uncomfortable self-reflection on their part, because I'll repeat something I think I've said on this show before. The change in the polls is much less a reflection of people's judgment of Mark Carney than it is a reflection of their judgment of Pierre Poilievre. They have to change how Poilievre is seen in order for him to be the right answer to this problem. And I don't think they want to confront that.
Well, that takes me right to the next point I was going to make, which is that it's worse than the Toronto Star article suggests, because the Star's suggestion is, I don't know, Conservatives are laughing. Oh, you guys are talking about how much you agree with the Toronto Star. But the point of the writer is that the issue set has changed and the Conservatives have not. I think it's worse than that. I think that the issue set has changed. And some of the things that the Conservatives have built their campaign, their message, and their leader offering around are now actually not just less relevant. They're actually harmful. And Bring It Home as an example. Canada First, even as they tried to sort of rebrand that, I think that's actually in a weird way pejorative and could be unhelpful. The insistence on the carbon tax, a bunch of these things start to get in their way. Final thought. Just picking up on what you guys said about the switch to, okay, here's the way we stick with it. Like, to me, obviously, you take the credibility and the equity that you've established on cost of living, you translate that into the discussion about Trump and tariffs and frontline economic impacts, and you use that to strengthen your offering and to migrate your offering. To stick with the carbon tax and say, now what we're going to do is we're going to hit on the emissions on industry. I think that leaves you very vulnerable in two ways. One is the one you guys have identified, which is that at some point you're going to get busted on. Wait a second. So you want to give a benefit to the largest corporations? We can actually fairly and unfairly characterize them as polluters. That's who now you're coming to the rescue of. Now that Carney has taken the burden off of the individual taxpayer, you want to take it off of these large corporations. That seems like a strange offering to me. But even more fundamentally, it takes you to a place of what's really behind that. It has the risk of really polarizing this fight, because then it starts to get into energy producing organizations and corporations. It starts to take you into a West versus East, and they find themselves aligning with, like, this could be 1980, right? This could be a 1980 election. People are making lots of comparisons, different ones. 1980, Pierre Trudeau comes out of nowhere as a returning commodity, and people are like, we need to hire a prime minister who's willing and able to take on Levesque and the threat of separation. And in the West, they're like, how can you fucking are you serious? We're going to go back to these guys? Are you fucking kidding me? And that dynamic led to a very sharp voting break between Central Canada and Western Canada. And this election has ingredients for that. I know the Liberals don't like to say that. They don't want to acknowledge that. They don't want to accept that. But it is shaping up. It could end up in that way. And Poilievre, by going after the emissions cap, could reinforce that frame, could reinforce that dynamic. And it's not a dynamic that delivers him sufficient seats in Ontario and Quebec to win an election, much less even in Atlantic Canada. So I don't get it.
Yeah.
I think he's chasing diminishing returns down that rabbit hole.
It has come to my attention that I, Gary, the AI-generated voice who shills for air quotes media, am not popular with our listeners on YouTube. Or should I say one listener goes by an alias of cutlery and soiled clothing. Well, suck it, Fork Laundry. This one's for you. Actually, Forky, it's a proposal for everybody, and you're gonna like it. Advertise on air quotes pods, and you can get my nauseating voice off the air. Because your message will be read by one of our influential and human hosts, David Herle, Kate Hammer, or Mike McDonald. Or just record any piece of creative in your ad agency's fancy production studio and send it to us. Either way, you'll be reaching Canada's most influential listeners at this crucial intersection of politics, and who knows what the fuck happens next. Trump, a new prime minister, new economic policy, a whole new world order. Baby! My data points are tingling. Curse of Politics, the Hurly-Burly, and Hotel Pacifico have the ears of cabinet ministers, elected officials, and the political class, leading journalists, the C-suite, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. Prime influence time. So let's do Forky a solid. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com to get rid of Gary and get your message to the decision maker.
Okay, I want to do a quick drive-by on issue management of Carney's financial assets. Scott, I want to start with you on this because you have a lot of experience actually in this area with Paul and with others. It's one of the things I haven't really loved about the way they've managed an issue. The first thing is they sort of let this thing drag on. They had a story about the Brookfield decision to move jobs that lasted many more days than it needed to last. And then after saying he would comply with the rules and everything. He put his assets into a blind trust, did not publicly disclose them. It's a different approach than Paul took, for example. And I fear, Scott, I want to lead with you on this, but I fear it leaves them just open a little bit. Like, it's just a vulnerability. It's just a crack. I don't know if it will ultimately mean anything, but I can see you. I can see you getting a screwdriver in there and opening up that crack a little bit and a little bit and a little bit. With what are these assets and how is he compromised?
I agree. It's a challenge. It's a challenge for a reason. If there was an easy answer, I'm certain that they would have taken it. The challenge is it's different than Paul's circumstance, where Paul owned a business essentially that had interests, and we got dinged with that when he was finance minister, where people would say, well, you're making changes of general tax application for the benefit of your own company, even though it was in a blind trust at the time and so forth. And that's the core issue, is that if you can persuade people.
He had those, Scott, if I could interject, when he was first elected.
Yes.
Done a public declaration of everything that he owned, from movie theaters to ski resorts to whatever the fuck it was, right?
When none of that was required at all. And the core issue is that it comes down to is that two things, one tactical, one more fundamental. The tactical thing is, if this is the kind of issue that, because it's complex and complicated and it makes people defensive, and leaders don't, like, people think about leaders as well, they're political leaders, but they're people, and they get fucking they get a little wiggy about their own shit, right? And it's private, and it's my money, and that's for my kids, and that's because, and I didn't no one handed me this, goddammit. I was like vice president of Goldman Sachs when I was 29, coming out of Edmonton. It wasn't because I fucking inherited all of this. I'm not, Thurston Howell. So it gets complicated. My point is, tactically, you hit the right question, you get the right jibe going on it, it can turn a 1-day issue into a 3-day issue, right? And you can't afford that when you're trying to resurrect your party from a 26-point deficit and maintain momentum that has just started to gel. The second and more fundamental thing is people have to be persuaded that in all things and at all times, your only motivation as prime minister is the public interest. People know you're a fucking reptilian politician. They know that you're self-interested. They recognize that, but they can never be persuaded that the reasons behind this policy choice or that policy choice is that, you had an interest in Brookfield and they therefore own all these parking lots in, fucking Belgium. And that's why you really, like, you can't get into that world. Blind trust is a difficult thing. He answered the question on the day of the swearing in. I didn't think it was as smooth as it could be. He sort of fumbled to say, well, it's a blind trust. He meant to be saying, the point is, it's blind to me. And that way, that I'm not mucking around in it. But it came off as saying, well, the benefit of a blind trust is you can't see it. It's like, yeah, well, we know that's the fucking problem, man. So I think it's going to be a challenge. I think they're going to have to manage it. And I think there are ways to manage it. I won't go song and verse, but one is you have to be demonstrating you're always surpassing, not meeting, but surpassing the requirements. And I think a second thing is you have to be willing to make choices. At some point, you have to be willing to say, I will divest of this thing, or I will walk away from that. And people need to see you making choices that position you squarely on their side, as compared to the hypothetical partisan accusation of being on your own or personal or profitability side.
Kory, all of this, in my experience, watching this takes me to one conclusion, which is his nascent political organization, group of advisors around him, does not contain a person with the stature to him to look him in the eye and say, that's not right, and you're not doing it that way, and I'm closing this, you're not leaving this office until we fucking figure this out. Because I know that what his instincts would have been, because I know what everybody's instincts, Scott described them well in this regard. And this is when staff and advisors come in and say, you're not thinking clearly about this because it's you. And I'm telling you what you need to do here, and force it on them. I don't think he's got that structure. And that may play out in different ways over the course of the campaign.
So hard to have these conversations with Paul. And you feel like such a tourist, even as a close aide who's known him well for years, because you're now enmeshed in people's bank accounts and their lives and what they hope to leave for their children and what they've earned and take pride in having earned over the course of your life. This is unbelievably delicate territory for an advisor, but at some point it's incredibly necessary. And, you got to find the person who's willing to say, at the expense of our friendship and our relationship professionally, I got to tell you, do this, don't do that. It's not fucking easy.
Well, you're assuming that somebody hasn't looked at it and doing the blind trust isn't better than the disclosure. Like sometimes when you see somebody make a issues management decision that is perplexing, and we're trying to figure out what it means, it's because we don't have all information. But it invites that question. So what the hell is in this thing? I was like mildly curious before. Now I'm really curious. And we'll see whether it is sustainable to not answer those questions, to not have that full disclosure. I guess time will tell. You might be able to whistle past it because, the Trump stuff and other things are just so dominant that this just doesn't make the grade for things that the public gets engaged in. But I think it has the potential to. And I think it raises questions that are difficult to answer. It's to your point that you just made, Scott, it's, and David, you as well. Like, do you think that people in the Trudeau administration didn't say you shouldn't take these vacations? I'm sure they did. I guess I don't know for sure, but I'm going to assume that more than one person said on the first occasion of that this is a bad idea. And if they didn't on the first one, I'm pretty sure they would have on the second or third. Say, hey, do we really want to go through that again? Yeah, go through it. They did. And maybe it's nobody has the stature to force it. Maybe it's that in terms of actually opening up the hood of that and looking at it, it's like this was the least bad option available to them in their mind. I don't know. But it's an unhelpful question to have lingering out there, that's for sure. And I assume that the Conservatives are going to double down on that line of attack. At least I certainly would.
Jordan, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, Kory has, I think, elegantly demonstrated the vulnerability of this because it's blind and we don't know what's in it. All sorts of allegations can be made. And look, I think that there's a real risk that something like this is an ongoing vulnerability that could pop up at a moment that you least want it to during the campaign. And that's really the risk that you have to watch out for. Carney knows what's in the blind trust. That's the other thing. So it's, he knows what businesses he has interest in. So it does leave him vulnerable to the idea that there's a conflict of interest. Does he still hold does he still hold stakes in Brookfield that would make him money if Brookfield's bidding on government contracts? Like, those are important questions, right? And so I think that right now the answers he's giving are not satisfactory to that. I think also, as I've said before, he is very chippy when asked about that. It's not a good look for him. He needs to be positioning himself as, holier than the Pope on this stuff. I think the other thing that's really unhelpful about the story is that it's also a constant reminder that he's a multimillionaire who, swans around with a lot of incredibly rich people living a very different life from what most Canadians...
Suits.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, no, sorry, that's Chuck.
But, and it's also a reminder of his ties to a lot of the structures of global finance that people feel have really screwed them in their lives. So that stuff's a little bit more intangible, but I think it's also not helpful for him. Like, he's more helpful positioned as a technocrat, not as a sort of global finance bro. And this puts him more in that category. So I think that they're going to be revisiting this over the course of the campaign.
I'd be less, I'd be more surprised if there were huge conflicts of the national interest. I think what you're probably more likely to find in these things that would be uncomfortable politically is just extreme hypocrisy. Like, you are in favor of, all this CO2 emission reduction rules and regulations and everything, and you own 73, an interest in 73 different coal plants in China or some fucking thing like that. Like the opportunities for hypocrisy are probably more damaging then that you're somehow going to wire the federal government tax policy into some way that benefits you disproportionately. But I think I'll go back to 2018, David. I think one of the great problems with Hydro One was that we're seeing rates going up because we're getting out of coal, yet you're buying fucking coal plants in the United States. And and that just makes people angry. So I think that's the kind of stuff that I would see the greatest vulnerability on. But who knows? Because we don't see anything because it's blind.
All right. Time for Mr. Pinent. Gordon, can you bring in the Hey Yous, please?
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right. Who's got one?
Well, I'll toss one to all the premiers out there. I think that we need to see a lot more communication south of the border. I think Ford has obviously been doing a lot of that, and I think you've seen Danielle Smith do some. But I think we really need to see all of the premiers stepping up in a similar fashion. It shouldn't just be Ontario government ads that are running south of the border promoting the relationship with the United States. I think every province should be doing that kind of work, and I think this is really a part of the effort that the provinces can play a useful role in. And so my message to all the premiers would be, buy your ticket to DC or New York or Houston or wherever it is, and get out there and do some media, do some speeches, and do some advertising. And let's make sure that we're continuing to communicate throughout this period.
And maybe skip MSNBC, eh?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, mine dovetails nicely off Kory's.
Right.
So my Hey You is going out to Danielle Smith to not use taxpayer money to buy a plane ticket to Florida to go do a fundraiser later this month with noted far-right homophobe Ben Shapiro, who's also online boosting the Canada should be a 51st state crap. There's no benefit to her going down to a fundraiser for a conservative university using Alberta taxpayer dollars. With somebody like that, there's not a benefit there. And she looks ridiculous. And I think it does harm our overall approach as a country. It's not serious. And it undermines our negotiating position when you are being seen on stage legitimizing commentators like that who are boosting Trump's secessionist crap. And I really think she should rethink that. It's a big mistake.
Fair enough.
Scott. Well, you got to talk to conservatives though if you want to win this fight.
But you don't have to go down and sit with Ben Shapiro at a conservative university fundraiser when he's tweeting that we should be part of the United States.
Scott.
I'll just say on that, splitting hairs on what is and what is not an appropriate level of MAGA accommodation is a very dangerous fucking talk for conservatives in the course of the next 40 days. Like really, you might be right and be very wrong. So it's really treacherous territory. My Hey You is goofy. My Hey You is to Hope. On the weekend, I watched Shawshank Redemption for the first time with my 11-year-old. Introduced him to the world of that movie. He was anxious to see it. And Morgan Freeman in that movie says to Andy Dufresne, the lovely Andy Dufresne, hope is a dangerous thing. Hope can drive a man insane. I'm on the brink of going insane. I suddenly, as a consequence of the performance I'm witnessing, the trends that I'm observing, and the polling that I'm being constantly confronted with, starting to hope. And it's a dangerous thing, man. It's a dangerous thing. There's 40 days to go. Liberals, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. Don't get over your skis. Don't get ahead of yourself. Don't permit hope to translate into confidence, to translate into assumption. This thing looks like it could be competitive again. We've just talked for most of this pod about all the problems the conservatives have. They don't mount to a hill of fucking beans for the problems that we've had. We had a 26-point deficit 8 weeks ago. That can snap back on us like an electric chainsaw in a second. I don't know what an electric chainsaw is. An elastic band, I think, was the word I was looking for. But in any event, hope, okay. But keep your hope in check. It's not something you want to get drunk on right now. Get the work done.
Scott's been getting kicked in the head for so long that just getting kicked in the ribs feels like a win.
When I start to feel excited,
we're going to hold your hand through this.
When I start to feel excited, I begin to doubt myself, maybe even hate myself.
Kory, my hey you goes out to a fellow Saskatchewanian, Mike Burton.
Hey.
Right? Don't know if you know Mike, but he is gunning. He's gunning for our status as the top Saskatchewan-based political organizer. He was in charge of Mark Carney's field operation. He started his political career working with my sister in Regina, and has graduated all the way up as a senior chief of staff in the Trudeau government. But he ran the field operation for Carney, who got 86% of the vote. Scott, not quite the 93 that Paul got, but Carney was running against a real deputy prime minister, so it was presumably a little bit tougher. But nonetheless, a blowout, impressive performance. He's taking some time off from politics now, spent some time rejuvenating himself. But that was a hell of a performance, Mike. And Kory and I see you coming. All right. That's our show for today. I want to thank the three of you for being here. Thank you very much. I want to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN. And all of those accursed out there who watched the show today and are waiting with bated breath for the election call so that they can have us every day, bright and early in the morning. We'll be back next Monday, if not sooner. See you later, accursed. Take care of yourselves.